Welcome to Next to Madison, a podcast to help you live your best life.
Welcome back. Another episode of Next to Madison. This is episode 149. On this episode, we are talking about overcoming adversity. We all have challenges in our life, but it's how we overcome them, how we think about them, how we deal with them that determines how our future goes. So on this episode, I'm sitting down with author and comedian Jeffrey Gurian, who has recently written a book called Overcoming Adversity, where he has actually sat down and interviewed people that have overcome unbelievable challenges in their life to become remarkable. Nothing could hold these people back. And these stories are meant to be uplifting, inspiring. Whatever challenge you're facing in your life, there is always a way out. There is always hope and always faith. So when you believe in faith, you don't have fear. I've always said that when I start to get fearful, I turn to my faith and I realize that I don't need to be fearful. I'll be okay. And challenges we face are meant to help us grow. We should always be grateful. I know we've talked about gratitude on this podcast a lot. It is so important to be thankful for what you have. There's so many people out there that are dealing with so much more. And so hopefully you will find this podcast uplifting and inspiring and to kind of help you overcome the challenges in your own life. We are with our guest, Jeffrey Gurian. How are you?
I am great, and it's so good to see you, Madison. Always, It's been too long. It's been too long.
I know. I hope to be back to New York soon. I miss seeing your face in person.
Where are you now? What state are you in?
I'm still kind of hanging out in Colorado. I'm just.
Oh, okay. You know, one of the stories in my book is from Colorado. We'll get to that, but whenever I hear Colorado, it strikes a chord because the story is so powerful.
Okay, well, perfect. Well, you guys, in my intro, I had said the name of the book was Overcoming Adversity. It's actually Facing Adversity. So I just wanted to make that correction so we know. And where's the book available?
It's available on Amazon and any place where they sell books, but mostly on Amazon. And it just came out. It's got 52 5-star reviews. And
Excellent.
It looks like this: stories facing adversity, stories of courage and inspiration. And it's all true stories. It's stories that I collected over 20 years. I started in 1999, and every time I saw a story about somebody who overcame something amazing in life, I cut it out because I've always been fascinated by people who don't let things get the best of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all have our different challenges and obstacles that we face. Some of us are much luckier than others, but these stories are so uplifting and inspiring as well. So you had mentioned the one in Colorado. So let's start with that one. I want to hear that story.
Okay, sure. Well, I just want to say, we've all been through so much in the past 2 years, and it's been a very trying time for many, many people. And after I recovered from COVID double pneumonia, I was in the hospital. I had COVID double pneumonia, and I had to recover. It took me months to recover, and I was staying home. And during that time, I wanted to take a negative and turn it into a positive. And I've been collecting articles for more than 20 years, and I have them in folders in a closet. And I said, what can I do now? And I said, I want to write something inspirational for people who are going through so much. And it's the third book in my happiness series. I have 8 books, but my last 3 books, my first 5 books are all on comedy, but my last 3 books are what I call my happiness series. And they're inspirational books to give people hope and to help them get through hard times. So this particular story that happened, well, it winds up in Colorado. This little 3-year-old boy put his hands in a machine. He saw a machine that was whirring, and he put his hands in, and it cut off his hands. Not only did it cut off his hands, but it also cut off the thumb on one of his hands. And his father saw this happen. His father happened to be a surgeon, but not that kind of surgeon, not the kind of surgeon that does reimplantations. And the mother was a nurse. They rushed him to the hospital, and it happened to be a holiday, and there were no surgeons around who could do that kind of surgery. So the father had no choice but to try the surgery. He assembled a team of doctors, and they operated on this little boy for 9 hours, and they reattached his hands. That's not the story. Wait till you hear. But the hands were not really functional. They were attached, but they weren't functional. The grandfather happened to be a martial artist, a black belt in martial arts. And as this little boy was growing up, his grandfather trained him every day in martial arts in order to be able to use his hands. And that little boy grew up. Today, he's a famous spinal surgeon. He runs the spinal surgery department at a hospital in Colorado. How is that for a story? Is that unbelievable?
That's that's amazing.
Yeah, I can't even wrap my mind around it. When I found that story and read, I said, this is the most amazing thing for a little boy to have his hands cut off and then to become a spinal surgeon. He was first thinking of becoming a hand surgeon and then changed his mind to do spinal surgery. You know the dexterity that you have to be any kind of a surgeon?
Yeah.
You know, I've done oral surgery on people, and I know you have to do, it's very, very detailed, very exacting. You have to have an amazing touch.
Yeah.
And here, this little boy had lost his hands, and now he just had minor scars. He's also a martial arts expert. He's won awards as a black belt in martial arts and runs the spinal surgery department at a hospital in Colorado. Gives you chills, right?
It does. Yeah. It's how you don't let the bad things in life affect you, but you become stronger for them.
So I put together this whole book, and it's all filled with amazing, inspirational stories that make you feel grateful for what you do have, because that's the key. You know, I once heard somebody say that happiness is wanting what you already have. You know, all of us have goals. We have things, you know, and I like it too. And all of us have goals and things that we want to achieve. But sometimes we forget to be grateful for the things that we already have.
And I've talked on this podcast about gratitude. We've had people on, and how it's so important to be grateful for what you have in order to get more, because it's and I've used this example before on this podcast. It's like if you gave somebody, you spent all this time and you gave them this gift and you're so excited about it and you give it to them and they just aren't that excited. Your desire, kind of your wanting to give them a gift, kind of just goes away. Well, that's kind of how God feels when we're not appreciative of all the amazing things that he's given us. So you have to be grateful, because then God, or whatever you believe in, the universe, will say, okay, now I'm going to give you more.
You know, I tell that story exactly in different words. It's like somebody coming to your door with a beautiful present, and instead of saying thank you, you slam the door on them. And you don't say thank you even. And just that thought, it's so uncomfortable to me that someone could do that. But that's what it's like, not being grateful for the things that you have. And it's perfectly fine to want other things. There's nothing wrong with achieving things in your life. But having a sense of gratitude, like I make gratitude lists periodically. Not every day like some people do, but every once in a while, because I'm human and I can slip into a thing like, oh, why don't I have that? Why isn't this working? It seems to be working for other people, but not for me. And anytime you go to a place of self-pity, it's like the universe puts someone in front of me that makes me understand how grateful I should be.
Yeah.
And I say, you know what? I shouldn't need to see that in order to feel grateful, because luckily all my senses work. You know, about 6 years ago, I had a heart attack, and I was back on stage 5 days later. And the owner, and it was it was what they call a widowmaker heart attack. It was the major artery to my heart was over 90% clogged. And I had never been sick a day in my life. And the next thing I know, I'm in an ambulance in the middle of the afternoon in the street. You know, it was a crazy story. You know, I'm walking in the street and I have this pain, and I'm on my way to a chiropractor for the first time. And the pain is getting worse, and I'm rubbing it, and it feels like it's helping. And I'm like, it can't be a heart attack. You can't rub away a heart attack. But it was getting worse and worse. So I said, I better tell somebody. But it's very embarrassing to stop someone in the street and say that you think you're having a heart attack. It's like, what if you're not, right? So a car pulled up with 4 cops in it, a police van. And it was pouring rain, by the way. And, you know, I hate to go out in the rain because of my hair. I usually don't go out if it's raining really hard. But I had no choice. So I went over to I knocked on the window of the van. And I said to the cop, I'm sorry to bother you, but I think I'm having a heart attack. And he says to me, well, I think you should go to the hospital. And I'm like, well, that's why I'm telling you. I'm not just telling everyone. I assumed that they would say to me, jump in, and they put the siren on and they take me to the hospital, right? That just makes sense. Well, that's not what happened. He says to me, we're stuck in traffic. It'll probably be faster if you walk. So I'm like, walk? I don't even know where the hospital is. Where's the hospital near here? So none of the cops knew where the hospital was. So he takes out his phone and he's looking for a hospital. And he says to me, do you have Google Maps? Now you have to picture the scene. I'm having a heart attack. I'm standing in the rain with an umbrella. He's asking me if I have Google Maps. And I'm like, no, I don't have Google Maps. He says, I think you should download Google Maps. So I walked away because I'm like, this is a Woody Allen movie. This is ridiculous. I'm telling the cops I have a heart attack. He's telling me to download Google Maps. But I could only get another half a block because the pain got really intense. So there was another cop there. And this is right across from Radio City Music Hall on 50th Street and 6th Avenue in the heart of Manhattan. Streets are packed. It's the middle of the afternoon. I say to this cop the same thing. Sorry to bother you. I think I'm having a heart attack. And he says to me, stand on the side. So I stand there a couple of minutes and I say to the guy, are they coming? He said, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't call them yet. The guy, like, no one was taking it too seriously. And I'll tell you the reason. I think it was because I stayed very calm because of my spiritual training. I was telling myself, this is my path for whatever reason. It's a weird thing, but my path. And I was actually very calm. And I was saying to people, I think I'm having a heart attack. So he calls them, a fire truck shows up first because firemen are EMTs and very often they're the first on the scene. So a fire truck pulls off, 4 or 5 guys get off. They say to me, who's the patient? I'm like, me. And the guy goes, well, climb up on the truck. And I'm like, really? He goes, nah, we're just messing with you like that. So everyone was joking, right? Well, it turned out they finally got me to the hospital and they saved me. They put in a stent. I'm back on stage 5 days later. And the owner of the comedy club says to me, what are you, crazy? You just had a heart attack. And I was like, yeah, but it's hard to get a spot here. I didn't want to lose my spot. So that's something that you could relate to because only a comedian would know how precious it is to get a spot in a major club in New York City.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to lose my spot. But that's an example of how to stay positive. I had to fight to stay positive with that, laying in the hospital, being in an ambulance, and with COVID, double pneumonia.
Yeah, I remember that. That was, I mean, we didn't know if you were going to make it.
I know. People were very concerned. And you know what? I have to say a word for the power of prayer and the power of thought.
Yeah.
Because I was too sick to answer anybody, but Ron Bennington announced on Sirius XM that I was in the hospital. And, you know, Corinne Fisher and Harrison Greenbaum got a lot of comedians together and made a get well video for me. And I started getting literally hundreds of messages from people. And I can't tell you how much that means to people when they're sick, you know, to get so much kindness. It was really amazing. And I said afterwards, it's too bad that you have to be that sick to know that people care about you. You know?
I know. It's always like you don't know how much you're loved till you die.
Yeah.
Or you're close to death.
Because on a daily basis, people don't say that to each other, you know. And luckily, they were using hydroxychloroquine at the time when they took me to the hospital. And that's I had put myself on Z-Pak, you know, because of my medical experience. I always keep antibiotics in the house. And I like to tell people because there are still people that are getting sick from COVID. And it's important to know that there's a bacterial component to this illness. Mm-hmm. You know, antibiotics don't work on a virus, but there's also a bacterial pneumonia. There's 2 types of pneumonia, viral and bacterial. If you have a viral pneumonia, antibiotics won't help, but a bacterial pneumonia, it will. And on the 3rd day that I was sick, it went to my throat. And I put myself on antibiotics. And with Z-Pak, you're supposed to stay on it for 5 days. I stayed on it for 10 days. and that saved my breathing. And then they put me on my third day in the hospital. Oh no, on my second day. First day, they just covered me with ice to bring down my fever and to raise my blood pressure. But on the second day, they started me on hydroxychloroquine. And on the third day, I started feeling different already. And on the fourth day, they sent me home in an ambulance because they were out of rooms. They needed rooms for people. They were putting people in the hallways already. So as soon as they stabilized me and my oxygen stayed at 96 to 98%, they felt it was safe to send me home. And so that's why I wanted to write this book, Facing Adversity, because things happen to people that they can't even imagine, that you couldn't expect. And how you handle it very often changes the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So there was a story in there that you asked me about a man who wrote a book that changed his life. And it started in Canada. This fellow, he was destitute. He had 4 out of 6 children were living with he and his wife in a very small apartment. And he didn't even have money for Christmas presents that year. And his wife kept saying to him, why don't you write a book? Why don't you write a book? And it was on his mind. And he started writing this book, and it was called The Shack. And the book, when he finished the book, he turned it in. 26 publishers turned him down. Every publisher that read the book turned him down, and he was distraught. And he found a guy that went into business with him. They decided to start their own publishing company. And they thought that if they could only sell maybe 1,000 copies of the book, that they could raise enough money to publish it on a larger level. And not only did he sell 1,000 copies, he sold 1,000 copies before it was even finished, because people who read the book were so moved by it that they gave it to other people. And it turned into, he sold 20 million copies, and he became a multimillionaire. And the book was a bestseller internationally, all over the world. And I love that story, because a destitute man who couldn't afford Christmas presents for his children, which is such a sad story to me.
Yeah.
And here his wife encourages him to write this book. And it changed not only his life, it changed the world. It changed for all the people who read it. 20 million people at the time of this writing, which was I found this article in 2016.
What was the book, The Shack, about?
It was about a father who gets a visit from God about losing a child. And it touched so many people that, again, at the time in 2016, it had already sold to 20 million people. But look at that, but he was rejected by 26 different publishers. And if it wasn't for the fact that he persevered, he believed in himself, and he went out and started a publishing company with one other guy who really didn't have a lot of experience. And look what happened. And then afterwards, of course, all these major publishers were sorry that they didn't take it, but it was too late, because now he published it under his own imprint. And his quote was, he said, the real gift out of all of it was not so much the money, but his spiritual growth and maturity that led to success. And he said, when you live without expectations, everything becomes a gift. In that, I'm a very blessed man.
I mean, there's so many lessons in that right there. It's like you never give up, and believing in yourself is number one, because you're an artist as well in this business. We can pitch something to so many people, and if it's just rejected, we say, okay, well, maybe it's not good enough. But if you
tend to doubt yourself, you tend to doubt yourself sometimes, because it's rejected by people with no taste sometimes. People judge comedy who often don't know anything about comedy. And it's the same thing, I think, in every art form, that people are judging you. But if you believe in yourself and you persevere, it just shows what you're able to accomplish sometimes, And so that story was very touching to me. Another one of the stories that really moved me was this young girl. It was entitled From Homeless to Harvard. And I found it in the year 2000. And this young girl, both her parents were homeless heroin addicts. They both had AIDS. And her mom passed away from AIDS. Her father lived a little bit longer and was living in a homeless shelter. They used to use their welfare money to buy drugs. And when she was 15, she wound up homeless. But she was so smart, she got into a special high school. And she wound up finishing this high school in 2 years instead of 4. And she entered a contest. She won a trip to Harvard. And she couldn't believe how beautiful the school was. And it became her dream to go to Harvard. But she was like, how could I afford to go there? I'm a homeless person. I have no family behind me. The New York Times was running a contest where you could win $12,000 by writing an essay on what obstacles you've overcome in your life, right? So needless to say, she won. She won, and when she applied to Harvard, they called her for an interview, and they had never accepted anybody with only 2 years of high school. They only accept people with 4 years. But when she went there and they heard her story, there was no way that they could turn her down. They gave her a full scholarship to Harvard.
Isn't that
A full
amazing?
4-year scholarship. Isn't that a beautiful story?
I remember hearing that story too. What did she end up doing with her life?
I have a note here. Let me see. That they made a movie about her, a TV movie in 2003 called Homeless to Harvard, the Liz Murray story.
Yeah.
And in 2010, she released a New York Times bestseller called Breaking Night. In 2018, she was profiled by Oprah on the OWN network. She's married to a high school sweetheart and has 2 beautiful children.
I love that. Isn't that
Those
amazing?
are the kind of stories that warm your heart, to see, I have 2 daughters. When I think of any child being, mistreated or homeless in some way, it's very sad, very, very sad to me. And to think that she could overcome that because she was so smart and so driven, and it's just amazing to me. So it's so interesting that I was collecting these stories literally for 20 years. I started in 1999. Every time I saw a story like that, I would cut it out and put it in a folder. And in my closet, I have many folders, all different categories of things. But that's the book I chose to write, just because, I think because of COVID and because we've all been under such stress for 2 years. I mean, nobody thought it was going to go like 2 years. I remember just before I got sick, I had gone to see Jerry Seinfeld at the 92nd Street Y. There were 600 people in there, all packed together. Nobody was wearing masks. The night before, I was with Chris Mazzilli, the owner of Gotham Comedy Club, one of my favorite comedy clubs. It's like a home club to me. We were sitting there. They were shooting a documentary about me, and they asked Chris if they could shoot in the club. So I'm sitting there with Chris, Michael Yo, and Jimmy Cannizzaro, who was the security guy there.
Yeah.
He used to be married to Lisa Lampanelli, right?
Uh-huh.
And the 3 of us all came down with COVID. Luckily, Chris didn't get sick. Michael Yo, Jimmy was in the hospital. I think he was even worse than me, because I think he was on a ventilator. And I was really, really sick. COVID, double pneumonia. So I just wanted to write a book that would inspire people and give them hope at a time when people are struggling. So many people are struggling. And that's why I'm grateful to you to be able to talk about this, because people need to hear stories of inspiration and hope.
Oh, definitely do. Tell us about the story of the model that was born with no legs.
Yeah, she was born with a condition. This is a story that I found in 1999, and she had just been photographed for the Anne Klein Significant Women campaign, and she was featured in People magazine's 50 Most Beautiful People in the World, and she was a double amputee. She was born with no fibulas, which are the bones from the knee down, and they told her parents that if she didn't have her lower legs amputated, that she'd be in a wheelchair for the rest of her life. So they made that very difficult decision, and she had to have her lower legs amputated as a little child. And they fitted her with artificial legs. And it got to the point where Alexander McQueen made her custom legs ending in 6-inch stylish boots. And,
I
and
love that.
she looked at her legs, she said, as working pieces of art. She would change these prosthetic legs that would all have different kinds of very stylish shoes on the end and boots.
I love
And she, she, in 1996, she entered the Paralympics, and she set a world record for the 200-meter run. And that's how she met Alexander McQueen and began modeling for him. And she even has a pair of gold legs. And her quote, I love the quotes that they offer. Her quote was, "Don't turn me into a tragic heroine. There's nothing tragic about it." And she refused.
I love that.
She always said that she refused to do any interviews that would turn her into a human interest story, because she felt that she was proud of her accomplishments. She didn't want to be looked at as someone separate. And so she became a top model with no legs. Amazing, right?
Oh, that is amazing. Like, it's just, so what is your advice to people that are listening that may, we all have challenges in our lives, but how, like, your advice to kind of overcome those challenges and use them to make yourself better?
Well, it's an interesting question. And I was talking about this the other night. I did a radio show, and they asked me, what's your advice? And, I said, advice is just words. When someone is in the midst of something, words can be comforting, but they're still lacking because they're just words. The power has to come from within you. You have to make a decision when you're facing something terrible. There's one story in there about a man who was born with no arms and legs, nothing. And at 10 years old, he was thinking of committing suicide, slipping under the bathwater. And then he said he realized that it would make his family too sad, and he didn't do it. And today, he's a world-known motivational speaker. He's married to a beautiful woman, and he has 4 children. And you know what I wrote in the book? And the singles bars are filled with tall, handsome guys with all their limbs who can't get a date, right? And this man, how wonderful it is that he's married to a beautiful woman. I saw a picture, and he has 4 children. And I saw him on Oprah too. And he gives people hope and inspiration. You have to find it from inside. People can give you advice, and advice is easy to say. It's like, take my advice, I'm not using it anyway. If you ever hear people say that, advice is very easy to give. But the idea is that God doesn't make any mistakes, I guess. And however you are, that's who you are meant to be. Like, honestly, there were times in my life when I wanted to be someone different than who I was. And then one day I realized if I hadn't been exactly who I was, I might not have met the woman who gave me my children. And to me personally, that's very important. So first of all, I honor her as the mother of my children. And I'm grateful. I'm very grateful for that. And I realized that I had to be exactly who I was. I couldn't be any different, because maybe I wouldn't have had children. Maybe I would have had other children. Who knows? I don't know those things. But I do know that the ones that I do have are so dear to me that I had to be exactly who I was. And when I got that thought, it was a very comforting thought. Every single person in the world has something about them that they would change if they could. Right? There's nobody, I don't think there's anybody who's perfectly happy with themselves. Everybody has something that they would change. But the idea is acceptance is key. To accept the situation that you're in, and to accept who you are. That every single thing that happens is your path. So when I was laying in the hospital, I had to say, well, for whatever reason, this is my path. I don't know why, but I have to be here. I can't change it. You can't only believe in these principles, and I refer to them as spiritual principles. You can't only accept these principles when it feels like your life is going perfectly. It feels like it's more important when it feels like nothing is going right, to understand that these principles are very powerful, and that for whatever reason you're going through what you're going through, you have to go through it It's part of your path. And sometimes what seems like a bad thing turns out to be something good in the future. People lose a job, and then they get some amazing job that they wouldn't have been able to get if they still had that old job, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, it's so true, because sometimes, like in our lives, like something we really want, it doesn't happen, and then maybe 6 months or maybe 2 years later, you realize, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful for that, because either you learned a lesson, something better came along. And I liked what you said earlier about, God doesn't make mistakes, and I think we have to realize that, your little quirks and things of that you would change about yourself, God made you in his eyes, and you're a perfect human being in his eyes, and to accept that and have gratitude for what we do have. But we come down here with these challenges in order for our souls to evolve and grow until they go back home.
Right. And supposedly we even choose our families before we're born
I've
to
heard
learn,
that.
to learn lessons that we didn't learn in a previous life. But you have to open your mind to the concept of a higher power. You don't even have to call it God. You could call it nature or the universe, whatever you want, as long as you know that it isn't you. Because when you think that it's you that's controlling your whole life, then you tend to blame yourself when things don't go the way you'd like them to go. And, I wrote all about that. If you don't mind, my first book on happiness
You
is
were
called,
on the podcast a
we
year
talked
and a
about
half
that.
ago, and we talked about the book, which was Healing Your Heart by Changing Your Mind, and how important your thoughts are.
Right, a spiritual and humorous approach to achieving happiness. And
Yes.
how I cured myself of stuttering. I stuttered so badly through my 20s and beyond. And I challenged myself. It took me years to learn to let go of thoughts that I created that were not valid for me. People need to realize that just about every single one of us are holding thoughts that are not valid for us. And our thoughts are not necessarily based on our experience. They're based on our interpretation of our experience, which is why you can have siblings that are completely different. You can have two kids that grow up in the same household with the same parents, and they're completely different people. And if you ask them about their childhood, you'd think they had different parents because,
Yes.
because their interpretation of what happened to them is very different. And, it's one of those things that I find very interesting. To examine your thoughts is not an easy thing, but that's what I had to do to cure myself. And now, as an avocation, I work with stutterers all over the world. I have stutterers in many different countries that I work with, as far away as Russia. I don't know if I'll still be working with them, but,
Yeah.
but, but I work with people all over the world to teach them how not to stutter. Because with most people, they created it in their mind. There's nothing physically wrong with them. I realized one day I didn't stutter when I was alone. I only stuttered when I was trying to talk to somebody else. And
Isn't that interesting? I think maybe, what is it, like a nervousness?
well, yeah, I mean, that ties in with it. It can be a lack of self-confidence and self-esteem. And we give ourselves a disability. It's like self-sabotage in a way, to hold yourself back. I was the kind of kid, I made believe I didn't know the answer in school so the other kids would feel better about themselves. I didn't want to make myself look smart so they would feel stupid. So I would rather sacrifice myself. And if the teacher called on me, I'd say, I don't know the answer, even though I knew it, just to make other people feel better. So a lot of stutterers give themselves a disability so that other people around them will say, oh, well, I'm better than that guy. He can't even speak well. It's a very strange way to think, to give yourself a disability. And what I tell stutterers is, would you ever walk on the street all bent over and make believe you have a problem with your back to try to get pity from people? And they're like, no, I would never do that. And I said, well, that's what you're doing when you're stuttering. If there's nothing wrong with your speech mechanism and you started doing this, most stutterers started around 6, 7 years old. So they've already been speaking for several years without stuttering. And then something happens that makes them start to stutter. And so what I tell people, I created a website. Also, during COVID, I had time and I figured out how to make a website. I can't believe that because I'm not a tech guy, but I was able to do this. And it's called stopstutteringNowGurian.com for any of your listeners who know someone who stutters. And I tell people, if you can speak better when you're alone, then there's a good chance that my techniques will help you, because you can't have a disability based on your location, right? If a man has a limp, he limps in every room of his house. He can't go into a room and close the door and walk perfectly. But if you could speak better when you're by yourself than when you're with other people, then it means that there's really, theoretically, there's nothing wrong with you, and you could be helped. And that's the key, because people aren't telling people who stutter that they can be helped. They're telling them to accept their stutter and not be embarrassed about it. And as you know from the Serenity Prayer, acceptance is for things you cannot change.
Yeah.
Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And that's why I wrote my second book on happiness, called Fight the Fear: Overcoming Obstacles That Stand in Your Way, because that's just the theme with me. I'm fascinated by overcoming obstacles. So what I did in 2019, just before the pandemic, I went to Japan all by myself. It was the scariest thing I could think of to do. I had, for some reason, I wanted to go to Japan. I studied Japanese like 3 times. I took level 1 Japanese, and they told me, oh, don't worry, everyone speaks English. You'll have a great time. No one spoke English. It was like, in the hotels, they speak English, but the average person, it's like the average person in New York. You think they're fluent in Japanese? No. So I went to Japan, and I was lost every single day for 2 weeks, but I made it. I proved to myself that I could do something like that. And that's what I mean when I talk about fighting the fear. I had to do it to stop stuttering. I had to do it to get on stage, to perform comedy. I had to do it to become a doctor, to open a practice, to start a family. Everything that I faced with fear. And I had to learn to tap into the inner strength that we all have, but a lot of people don't realize it, to overcome those things, because fear is a bully and it holds you back from achieving your goals. And that's why I admire all these people in this new book, because they didn't let those things stop them. No matter what, they were determined to lead happy, meaningful lives. And to me, they get the utmost respect for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it's so important to, obviously, like we said, be grateful for what you do have, and realize that you are made in the image of God, and to accept the things you can't change. And really, we all kind of have equal opportunity within ourselves. It's just what we do with the situations or the obstacles that are around us that either make or break us.
Exactly. And I'm surprising that you know, as a person who never had a problem in your life.
Yeah. One I'm dealing with right now, but it's not really a problem. It's more of a blessing, and it's value related, and it's all good. But yeah, we all have so many challenges. But I was just thinking about that this morning, how grateful I am that I have, a great family and a roof over my head, and just
Right.
amazing experiences and things of that sort.
All the things that very often we tend to take for granted.
Well, exactly, because it's always like, we all want more money. We all want certain things to go faster than they're going. But if you really just step back and you're like, wow, so this is a good day. I have food to eat. There's clean water. I've got a beautiful dog. The sun is shining.
Exactly.
Other things will come more naturally because you're so grateful for what you have. You don't have a chance to be desperate. So to say, and desperate is such a negative energy. You're bringing in that good energy so you can have kind of more opportunities around you. And I was thinking the other day, I felt lucky, and I think is when you really, really do feel lucky for all the things you have, things will just work for you. There's nothing to stop it.
We all vibrate at a certain frequency. And when I was in the hospital, I had to really fight to stay positive, because when you're in a negative space, your immune system is not functioning as well. Your vibration is low.
Yeah.
When you're happy, if you walk into a room full of people and there's one person who's really happy, you can feel it. The same as you can feel it if one person is really angry. If something's happening in the room, you can feel that energy. You can feel that tension. And it works both ways. And I had to really fight hard to stay positive, I was making myself laugh. I mean, they put me in bed next to a guy from Wuhan, China. That can't even happen. That only happens in the movies, but it happened to me. I'm, I'm laying there next to patient zero. Right?
Yeah, right.
And when I expressed my concern to the nurse, she told me not to worry, and she pointed to a thin curtain that was hanging between us. And I was like, meanwhile, she's wearing like a hazmat suit with swim fins and scuba gear. I have a thin curtain to protect me. I'm like, yeah, too bad Dr. Fauci didn't know about that. The thin curtain business would have totally blown up, right?
Oh my gosh, Fauci.
So I was trying to make myself laugh. And, you know, nurses would come by. Only one person was allowed in the room at a time because they were really wearing hazmat suits and everybody was very nervous. But they would come by my bed. A couple of nurses came and they took my hand and they say, don't worry, you're going to be okay. You're going to make it. And I'm telling you, those things are very important. Those little acts of kindness. When the guys came from the ambulance corps, you know, I waited 2 weeks before I called an ambulance because they were warning people, don't go to the emergency room if you don't have to, because the drugs was so strong. But after 2 weeks of being sick, I couldn't take it anymore. So I called them and they came to my door and one of the guys took my hand and he said to me, don't worry, you're going to be okay. And I can't tell you what that meant. I was so sick. And he was amazed that I could get on the stretcher by myself. He said most people needed to be carried. And they strapped me in and he said to me, of all the people I take into the hospital, you have the best physical presentation. And it just helped me, like those positive things because there's so much fear involved, you know? And then when they took me to the emergency room, they wheeled me into this cubicle and I'm laying there next to a woman who's screaming, literally screaming with every breath that she took. And I had to work so hard because my initial thing is to be annoyed. My initial, like, why would they put me next to a woman who's screaming? I'm sick. I can't listen to that. It was driving me nuts. So I had to step outside myself. And I had to work really hard with my mind and say, you know what? Instead of thinking about yourself, think of how scared she must be or how much pain she might be in to be in that state where she's screaming with every breath.
Yeah.
And that it helped me to get through it because you tend to personalize things. There's a tendency to think, why me? When something weird happens to you, why did it happen to me? And the spiritual answer is, why not me? Whoever promised you that you're supposed to have a perfect life with nothing happening to you? So we have to understand that sometimes things happen and it's completely out of your control.
Yeah.
And again, that's why I wrote this book. There was like, you know, a paraplegic girl who went to Harvard when she was 11 years old. And it's funny that a few of these stories wind up in Harvard. They must be very open to accepting people with hardships.
Yeah.
But when she was 11 years old, she got hit by a car and she was a paraplegic who spent the rest of her life, I believe she's still alive, she spent the rest of her life in a wheelchair. And she was so smart that her mother went with her to Harvard and lived with her for the whole 4 years and did everything with her, turned the pages for her in the book so she could study. And she graduated with an A average. She's 41 years old today, and she's an associate professor at Stony Brook and also a motivational speaker. Many of these people go on to become motivational speakers to carry their story. But when they asked her mother what it was like, she said, try to imagine being in a chair with your feet bound and your hands tied behind your back. Then imagine being on a machine that gives you only 13 breaths a minute. Then imagine never being able to use the bathroom or the shower when you want to brush your teeth, feed yourself, or wipe your eyes if you need to cry. Then put yourself in the most rigorous academic settings in the world. Ask yourself to read thousands of pages of text without being able to turn the page, attend lectures in all kinds of weather, submit an original research thesis, and have to defend it. And she became the very first quadriplegic person to graduate from Harvard, summa cum laude.
Oh my, I've chilled. That's amazing.
With a Bachelor of Science degree in cognitive neuroscience. And there's a book about her called miracles happen. One mother, one daughter, one journey. Oh, it chokes me up to even talk about it.
Oh, that like that amazing mom too. Like, oh my God.
Amazing. And her mom spent the whole 4 years with her, doing every single thing with her.
I mean,
It's just unbelievable. So those are the stories. As opposed, do you remember that I used to write for the Weekly World News?
oh
I don't know if you
yeah.
remember. And where I wrote stories like man paints replica of the Sistine Chapel with his beard. And
I remember that. Yeah.
man killed for giving girlfriend a snail instead of an engagement ring. You know, you hardly hear about beard painting anymore. You know, and like in Brooklyn, everyone has a beard, but they don't have the kind of beards that you can use for painting. They have
Right.
they have those short beards. It's hard to dip your beard in the paint. You have a very long beard. Can you imagine? He painted a replica of the Sistine Chapel with his beard. Do you know the kind of neck muscles you need for that?
Yeah, no kidding, right?
To lay on a scaffold and just paint away the whole Sistine Chapel. Unbelievable.
Wow.
Man impaled on spike still shows up for work on time. An amazing story.
Are these true stories?
Well, they're from the Weekly World News, so you have to guess. I'm not allowed to say.
Oh.
But I'm the reporter. It was they they were the precursor to The Onion.
Oh,
I
gotcha.
used to have my own column. It was called Gurian's World of the Bizarre. And it led to another book that I wrote called Man Robs Bank with His Chin. And other unusual stories missed by mainstream media. That's the important part. These are stories that most people have never heard of. Like man impaled on spikes, still shows up for work on time. Herb Stemp, he was an artichoke stuffer. 30 years on the job, never late one day. One day he has an accident, impaled himself on a spike on a fence. Paramedics come, they separate him from the spike, and he thinks he's going to be late for work, but he says, you know what, it's not that uncomfortable. The only problem was, he said, his jacket didn't close properly because most designers don't make a jacket to fit over a spike.
Yeah, right. Oh my gosh.
Thought he could wait until his day off. He didn't want to be late after 30 years, which was like the story of the man who developed a complete turtle shell. It started out as a small bump on his back, and his wife said it didn't really look like too much, you know? And after a few months, it developed into a fully grown turtle shell. And his wife said, he's always been kind of shy, but now I really have to coax him out of his shell. And she can't get a good night's sleep because he sleeps on his back with his legs going like that. You know, it's very hard to sleep with a man in a turtle shell.
Right. Yeah, I could imagine.
If that ever happens to you, pass it up, right? Canadian repairman wakes up with French accent, right? He was a toaster repairman. His wife said they've never done any traveling. So one morning he wakes up and he starts addressing her as mon chéri with a French accent. He starts wearing a beret. He grows a thin mustache and is using a walking stick. He said he feels like he's becoming French against his will. He doesn't really speak French. He speaks English with a French accent. And he claims that it came from getting a shock from one of the toasters he was fixing. Amazing story, right? These stories are very different than the stories in facing adversity.
Very different.
Very different.
So wait, so where can we before we wrap up, where can people still find these world news?
Yeah. It's on Amazon. It's in the book called, here it is right here. Man Robs Bank with His Chin and Other Unusual Stories Missed by Mainstream Media. If you like unusual stories, it's from my GNN network. GNN is Gurian News Network.
Okay.
Our logo is all the news that's fit to dance to.
Oh.
So if you like unusual, you know, like the New York Times says all the news that's fit to print.
Yeah.
Well, the GNN is all the news that's fit to dance to.
Gotcha.
It's the most unusual stories in the world. That's my reputation. Is I never sleep. I search for the most unusual stories in the world.
That's awesome.
So your listeners, your viewers should look for two different books: Man Robs Bank with His Chin and Facing Adversity, Stories of Courage and Inspiration, which is the third in the Happiness series.
Yeah, I read your first book. You sent me this Facing Adversity, kind of started going through it, but I can't wait to read it. And it's one of those, I feel like it's one of those books that you put on like your book, not your bookshelf, but almost like your nightstand. And when you're feeling a little bit down or you're facing something, picking up and reading one of those stories to kind of, inspire you and to just realize maybe it's not so bad.
Well, when you read the reviews on the Amazon page, it's got literally 52 glowing reviews of people who said that, one guy said that it changed his life. There are people that are very, very depressed, people that are really struggling with their sanity because of what we've gone through in the past 2 years. A lot of people lost people in their family because of this COVID thing. And
I know.
just a lot of horrible things have been happening. And so it's the kind of book that gives people inspiration and hope. To me, that's the most important thing. When I work with people, I use stuttering as an example. Many stutterers are very depressed. When I was teaching at NYU, I was in the oral medicine and orofacial pain department. That's the other part of my life. And I would work with people who had physical symptoms from depression and stress. Things like what they thought were migraine headaches. In this country alone, there's more than 150 million people that suffer with what they think are migraine headaches, but are really what they call musculoskeletal headaches that come from the TMJ, that come from clenching and grinding your teeth from stress. And people don't know all the symptoms that can cause. If you wake up in the morning and your neck feels stiff and achy, the last person in the world you'd ever tell would be your dentist. Why would you ever tell your dentist that your neck hurts, right? It wouldn't occur to you. And most dentists don't ask that question. So it goes undiagnosed. Most physicians are not familiar with those symptoms either. So that's what I used to treat: shoulder pain, neck pain, ear pain, hearing loss, all kinds of things that come from TMJ. And so, again, I'm grateful to be able to say that. I try and talk about that on any show that I'm on, because even if there's one person listening who's suffering with what they think are migraine headaches, they might know that there's a very simple solution to getting rid of them by wearing a soft appliance when you sleep, a soft night guard.
Yeah.
On your bottom teeth, and it relaxes the muscles in your head, and it takes away the headaches. And I used to collect books when I was in practice. I have books, literally books filled with letters of people who were cured by that. I once had a girl call me from the emergency room of a hospital. They were going to do brain tests on her. The pain in her head was so bad, they thought she had a brain tumor. And she thought to call me because somebody said to her, "By any chance, do you wear an appliance?" And she called me and she said, "Is it possible that the pain is from that? I haven't been wearing my night guard for a while." And I said, "Before you let them do brain tests, try that first." And sure enough, that was the problem. And
Wow.
she had such pain that she felt suicidal. That's how bad the pain can be. Because if you have pain anywhere in your body, it's very difficult to function. But when the pain is coming from your head,
headaches are the worst.
much worse. All your thoughts come from your head. If your head is not comfortable, how are you supposed to function?
Yeah.
So all these things are in my books. I write about each of those topics. I include them in my books because it's very important for people to know, because so many people are suffering when they don't have to.
Yes. It is very true. And obviously a positive outlook on life and being grateful for what you have can, really change everything. And also realizing that, something that seems like something bad today could be a lesson for tomorrow.
Right. You never know. And that's the thing. You just have to hang in there and hope for the best.
Exactly.
That's all we have.
Yep. And you got to have your hope. And when you are living in fear, you're not living in faith. So I'm always a big believer in that,
I'm so glad to hear you say that. Right. Faith is the opposite of fear.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that's why I wrote that book, Fight the Fear,
Yeah.
Overcoming Obstacles That Stand in Your Way. Fear is a bully, and fear
Yeah.
wants you to
Which
stay
sure
in
is.
bed. Fear wants you to stay in bed all day with the covers over your head and not do anything. And I confront it, and I'm willing to admit it. I fight fear on a constant basis, but I'll never let it get the best of me. Like now, I may be going to the Moon Tower Comedy Festival. I haven't been on a plane since I went to Japan, and I'm nervous about traveling. But if other people can do something, then I have to do it as well. And
Yeah.
I'm not talking about something like skydiving or something. I'm talking about regular things that people do on a daily basis and don't think twice about it. There's no reason for me to think that I have to be nervous about it or fearful.
Yeah. It's
So
going to be just fine and you're going to have a blast.
if you believe in prayer, some genius once taught me, when you first wake up in the morning, your first prayer should be, please release me from the fear.
Oh, I'm writing that down. I like that.
And that works. You do it every day for about 3 weeks, and the fear goes away. Because they say it takes about 21 days to break a habit.
Yep.
And so I started doing that years ago, and it gives me the courage to confront these things, which is why I went to Japan by myself. I had wanted to go 2 years in a row. A friend was supposed to go with me, and both times they canceled out. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to depend on anybody anymore to do the things that I want to do. So I'm going to go by myself. A 14-hour flight to Japan was a lot for me. I've never flown that long on a plane. 14 hours was crazy. And
Yeah.
then I used the little amount of Japanese that I had, and I got by. And I asked people for help, and I went on the subway every day to a different city, to a different part of the city. I did 2 comedy shows while I was over there in Japan, and it was great. It was a great experience, but I looked at it as a challenge. It
Yeah.
wasn't just a vacation. It was something that I had to prove to myself, because I just said to a guy, I'm nervous to go to Texas. He said, "What are you kidding? You went to Tokyo by yourself."
Yeah. No kidding, right?
Because Texas will be a snap for you. It'll be easy. But you know what? Because I have to rent a car, I have to choose a hotel. My ADHD kicks my butt. If you have ADHD, it causes a lot of confusion. And confusion can lead to fear. And it can keep you from making a decision or making a choice. So because I write about it, I learn I can control my mind. I don't let my mind control me. I control my mind. Your mind works for you. It feels like your mind is controlling you, but you tell your mind what to think. It's not the other way around. So when I'm in a position like that, I take the control, I take the power back. And that's what I did with stuttering. I convinced myself that I didn't need to stutter anymore. And as you can see, I've been given the grace to cure myself. I don't stutter.
Yeah. Now you speak in public doing comedy and
I use my voice in everything that I do, and I refuse to stutter. I could start again tomorrow, but I won't let myself, because there's no need for me to stutter.
yeah.
And that's what I teach people.
Well,
That
I love that. So what is the website again for the stuttering?
it's called Stop Stuttering Now Gurian, Gurian. StopStutteringNowGurian.com. And there's videos on there of people that I worked with,
Okay.
and there's a whole explanation of the technique. So for people who are interested or who know somebody, if you know them well enough to suggest to them, sometimes it's embarrassing. You can't, if you know somebody who stutters and you don't know them well enough, you can't even make that suggestion, because it doesn't feel polite to say that. But if you know somebody well enough that you could tell them, ask them to look at it, and my email's on there. And if it makes, I always tell people the same thing, if it makes sense to you, then there's a good chance that I can help you.
Yes.
It has to make sense.
Exactly. So yeah, if you guys know anyone or you yourself have a stuttering problem, definitely check out that website. Also, make sure to check out Jeffrey's books. The one that we talked mainly about today was Facing Adversity. Remember to stay positive. And the one thing I really love that I'm going to do, and maybe I'll not maybe, I am going to encourage all of you guys to do, is to do that prayer, which is please release me from the fear. Because when we're living in fear, we're losing our faith. So get back to faith and just remember things do happen for a reason. And let go the things you can't control. And I always just love talking to you because it's always so uplifting and positive and amazing. And obviously check out Jeffrey's other books. So if they go to Amazon, they type in your name, all your books should come up, correct?
Right, they all come up together. All they have to do is put in Facing Adversity, Gurian, Gurian, and that'll pop up, and the other books are usually right underneath it.
Awesome. Well, Jeffrey, thanks for coming back on the podcast and sharing these amazing stories. I'm excited to fully read this book.
Thanks so much for having me, Madison. It's also always great to see you. You're a very uplifting spirit. You're like a bright light.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. Thank you. And thank you for everybody who's listening wherever you are. And we'll see you next time to find out who's next.
Hey, your host here, Madison Malloy. Please make sure to subscribe to the show on all podcast platforms, and please rate and review us on iTunes and Spotify. Also, if you have any questions or comments, you can email us at contact@nexttomadison.com. I thank you again for listening. Bye.